So far, all we've been looking at are a particular type of equation, an inequality called linear. And in linear equations, we only have x multiplied by a coefficient and with integers or other numbers added or subtracted to it. As soon as we start to see an exponent like x squared floating around, this is no longer a linear equation. So if there's an x squared term, we call it a quadratic equation. The quad part, even though that sounds like 4, relates to when these were first explored, and they were first explored in looking at the area of a quadrangle. This is back in the 13th century Italy. So something like x squared plus x equals 6 is a quadratic equation, and it cannot be solved using the techniques that you learned for linear equations. You can't collect or combine the x squared and the x, and therefore you can't really isolate the variable the way you did with the linear equations. So we have to learn a different technique, a completely different technique for solving these equations. And that technique relies on a principle called the zero principle. So imagine I told you I'm thinking of two numbers, and their product is equal to 0. What do you know about those two numbers? So a times b is equal to 0. Well, you know that one of the numbers is 0, or the other number is 0. And that's quite a lot of information, really. If I told you instead the product of two numbers was something like 10, that really wouldn't tell you anything at all. The numbers could be just about anything. The only thing they couldn't be is 0. But knowing that one of the numbers is 0 or the other really narrows things down. Now, in order to use this technique, obviously the first thing we have to have is a product equal to 0. So we're going to have to manipulate this quadratic equation to get first everything onto one side so that we have 0 on the other, and then get a product. Now, turning something into a product is just another way of saying factoring. So all that practice you had a few lessons ago with factoring trinomials will come into play now. So the first thing we're going to do is subtract 6 from both sides. And that will give us everything on one side and 0 on the other. So that's the first prerequisite for using the zero principle. The next one is to write the left-hand side as a product. In other words, factor the left-hand side. And to factor that trinomial, we're looking for two numbers with a product of -6 and a sum of 1. Those two numbers are -2 and +3. So we can write this as x minus 2 and x plus 3. So now we've actually turned this into a product equal to 0. And just like on the right-hand side with the zero principle, it means we know that that factor, the first factor there, x minus 2, is equal to 0. Or the second factor, x plus 3, is equal to 0. And really this is beautiful because what we've done is we've turned this quadratic equation into two very simple linear equations, and now we know what to do with them. The x minus 2 equals 0. To get x on its own, we just have to add 2 to both sides. When we add 2 to both sides, we get x equals 2. When we look at the second one, we just have to subtract 3 from both sides, so we get x equal to -3. Quadratic equations typically have two solutions. Occasionally, those two solutions are identical, so it basically looks like you just have one solution. And sometimes there's no solution whatsoever, or at least no real solution. But two solutions is very common. So you can check it just like with other equations. Let's try plugging in 2. 2 squared plus 2 equals 6. Yes, that's true because 4 plus 2 equals 6. And what if you plug in -3? -3 squared is 9, +9, plus -3, same as subtracting 3, so 9 minus 3 is 6, so that's true as well. Let's try it again for the second one. First thing you want to do is get everything onto one side. Now, none of the trinomials we looked at started with -x squared, so you would not want to collect everything on the right-hand side for this particular example. Collect everything on the side that will give you a +x squared. So we're going to subtract 2x from both sides, and we're going to subtract 24 from both sides, and we're going to end up with that trinomial on the left-hand side equal to 0. All right, now we just have to factor that trinomial, looking for two numbers with a product of negative 24 and a sum of negative 2. So those two numbers are 6 and 4. Make sure you get the negative correct. It's going to be negative 6, so x minus 6, and positive 4, so x plus 4, equal to 0. And turn this now into two simple linear equations. The first factor is either equal to 0 or the second factor is equal to 0. And if x minus 6 is equal to 0, we can add 6 to both sides and get x equals 6. If x plus 4 is equal to 0, we can subtract 4 from both sides and get x equal to negative 4. Let's plug it in to check. If you plug in 6, the left-hand side would be 6 squared, which is 36. The right-hand side would be 2 times 6 plus 24, which is 12 plus 24, which is 36. So that's true. If you plug in negative 4 squared is positive 16. 2 times negative 4 is negative 8, plus 24 is also positive 16, and so that works.